Party, Howard, so that's really good. So please, everybody take their seats, because we are about to start right now. And please give a warm welcome for Mr. Howard Switzer.
Okay. All right, can you hear me all right if I hold it here? I like talking loud, but does this work better? I don't want to create too much distortion. But if that works, that work? Yeah. All right. Well, like Jamie says, I've been trying to get the Green Party to understand their platform. And we got monetary reform in there a while ago, but most folks aren't very conversant on it. So I'm a national delegate on the national committee. So every time somebody brings up an issue, I connect it to monetary reform. Because every issue is connected to monetary reform. And some people get tired of me doing that, but most people, I think, appreciate it. And so I'm just going to get on started through here. The title is What Monetary Reform Means to Greens. And I think it's to live on a living planet. That's kind of like number one for us, I think, for most of us. And because there's right now the extinction rate's 1,000 times over what it was 50 years ago, and it's accelerating. So that's a serious problem that isn't talked about in the media at all. And I think it's a serious situation and caused a lot by climate change and toxic waste. So it also, to Greens, means revolution, because Greens have been talking about revolution since they started, and which is, but you know, I'm helping them understand what revolution is about. Because a lot of times, you know, we don't want to trade one authoritarian regime for another. So when they say revolution, I say, no, you mean spinning around and ending up in the same place? That's what revolution means. No, we want a solution. So, well, okay, we want a revolution for a solution revolution. And, but we had a recent event happen with Bernie getting a big bunch of people rolling, a bunch of progressives, imagining that the Democratic Party was going to go their way. And when it didn't, a great many of them came to the Green Party, and we tripled in size overnight. And a lot more money coming in to the Stein campaign, so they're able to pursue, you know, TV and media and stuff like that a little bit more aggressively. And what was struck me about watching the Democratic convention and the burners and even Republicans, when you talk to some of the people, was how much people care about stuff. And so I was thinking, well, why don't we say that we're the coalition of care? You know, we want to get everybody on board. Another thing that we want, and this is the one that I keep talking to Greens about, is that monetary reform means a transition from the economics of greed to the economics of care. Now we know what. Yeah, we've already heard, you know, what the problem is with the banks, and we've also heard what the solution is with public money. A public versus private issue, I keep hammering on that one to get Greens to realize, you know, what the difference is. And the private money is what creates the economics of greed, because of the way that system is based on usury. And we know about how bad usury is. And it causes a lot of problems. And here's some of them. Predatory competition, endless growth, short-term thinking. Short-term thinking, that's one of them that I really think is important. We need a longer-term thinking. Concentration of wealth, mountain of debt. Whereas a public money system, it's creating money for public needs. So we're creating the economics of care just by doing that. Now, on the economics, as Jamie was pointing out, the transition is non-disruptive, right, to the economic system, but it's not to the social system, because changing from the economics agreed to the economics care is going to have profound psychological consequences among the population. But we've got it in, we know the purpose of government, right? It's supposed to be taking care of us, and it's not doing a very good job, but it's right there in the first sentence of the Constitution, what we're supposed to be doing with the tools that have been given us, right? The power to create money. I've been trying to get Jill Stein to preface her economic comments with one little sentence that says, if George Will asked, for instance, how do you pay for it, to say, well, government can create money. So we can easily pay for it. And then she can go on with the rest of her economic comments, which have always been about how we can save money, reeling in the military and stuff like that. One of the things that I try to remind folks is about cost. You know, private system, cost is a penalty. It's money out of your pocket. Oh, don't try to read all of this stuff. There's too much reading. If you write me, I can send you the PowerPoint and you can read it then. And whereas a public money system, cost is not so much a matter of money anymore, because you can print as much as you want, right? Whatever you need. But it becomes a matter of resources then. Do we have the resources for it? We can create the money, but do we have the resources to do this sort of thing? And so it gets people to start thinking about resources. Start thinking about the value of our resources. And so when the zeitgeist people talk about a resource-based economy, I says, hey, we got one. We could do one. And they say, oh, well, we don't want money. Well, now you got a problem. I'm a generalist, right? I'm not an expert in all of these details of monetary systems. And there are a lot, and I'm learning about more of it, but I try to stay general and with Greens, because until they're on board for the general stuff, no sense looking at the details much. But behavior of whole systems is unpredicted by the behavior of their parts, taken separately, and I keep pointing that out. Back up, don't think about money, think about the money system. And you can think of it as a circulatory system, for instance, in the human body. It can, for instance, if you had a heart disease that kept money or the blood money, from flowing to your hand, for instance, your hands start getting cold, your hands start hurting, perhaps, and you start treating your hand, wrapping it up because it's cold, but that's not going to solve the problem. The disease is in the heart. The disease is in the system. It's not at the end of the system where you're feeling the symptom, right? And so, as any doctor will tell you, treating symptoms only masks the disease. So it hides it. So all the focus on various symptoms and all these issues, what are some of those? Like Henry Thoreau said, the branches rather than the root. Here's some of the branches, right? So all of these things are connected to the debt money system that we have and control by international bankers. I call them international bankers. Is that right, Joe? Is that Joseph? Yours, one of the articles, I keep covering blanketing the Green Party with articles, and yours is one of them that I tend to send out a lot, and Stevens and Roberts, and keep them up on monetary issues. But there are many more of these issues. But of course, people are drawn to these issues because this is the locus of pain. This is where the pain is. And so, you do kind of tend to are drawn to those situations. But we need to treat the disease. I mean, those issues are like playing whack-a-mole, right? Because the system just keeps producing them. You just spend forever trying to address the symptoms. And so I did this little graphic to kind of show the branches that Thoreau talked about and the roots that we're talking about. And it is corruption at the base of it. This is, now I borrow a lot of slides from a lot of people. I've stolen some from you. Yeah, I know anybody that's had slides here. But looking at this is, 80% of us, and then there's a few people up here on top of the beanstalk. And I think we need to take the neat axe to it. But I was looking at this. I'm an architect, so I look at this as a structure. And I think, golly, that thing is flimsy and anemic. I mean, this could snap off. Terrible idea. But also, this is where the art and innovation comes from. Not there. So, what if we had an economy that looked more like that? Where this was the economic activity. Can you imagine? I can't hardly even imagine it. Comparing this two economies, if we had an economy like this, what kind of economic activity would be going on? That's robust, and that is structurally solid, right? But the system's rigged. Elizabeth Warren announced that at the Democratic Convention this year, right? She admitted the system's rigged. Well, we know it. You're in a box, Elizabeth. Break that window. Well, Bob Dylan, he was sad, but oh no, that's not Bob Dylan. That's Benjamin Disraeli. He's sad because he was just elected Prime Minister of England and discovered he didn't have any power. It's kind of like the Allende after the revolution. He said, well, we won the revolution, but we didn't win the power. Where's the power? And the money, right? We know that. Was Madison a conspiracy theorist when he said this? That the international bankers will use any form of abuse, intrigue, deceit, violent means possible to maintain their control over governments? I think so. And Aristotle pointed it out too, that governments make a mistake giving rich too much power. So why is it important? Well, you die if you don't have the money because you can't get housing, can't get food, can't get health care, anything like that. It's difficult, but it's also important because it influences policy. So the people with a lot of money have a lot of influence on policy, and that 80% of Americans, they have zero influence on public policy, as the Princeton study showed. None at all. But what I thought was interesting was here's 200 companies in 6 industries. They spent $508 billion over the last 10 years, and they got $4 trillion worth of benefit back from taxpayers, right? And but what I thought was interesting about this was, see all these industries up here? Oh, but that's the biggest one. And guess what? All of those industries owe them money. So does government, right? Everybody owes them money. So that is the one that we kind of are all focusing on. I like to show this picture. It's kind of old, but when people talk about the public debt, I didn't say national, Mark. I didn't say the public debt. Anyway, it obviously it doesn't even have to be there, really, and it's not all that big. It's the private debt that's huge. Look at that. Household and corporate debt is just way out there. So that's a problem, I think. I think Steve Keen says that too. And Hamilton thought it was great. They're out celebrating Hamilton. I thought, oh yeah, the bankers saw this coming and they wanted to get Hamilton pumped up as a hero. The father of U.S. political corruption. And if you don't know that story, I think you need to read Stephen's book. Yeah. So we have the money monster, right? And it's got corporate tentacles out there making money for bankers. Can we regulate it? Well, fellow architect William McDonough says any system where that needs a lot of regulation is a faulty system design. And I think that's quite right. Oh, scary. Here's David Rockefeller. We might say one of the oligarchs, I don't know. But he's here thanking the media, thanking all the newspapers and stuff for preparing the public to accept a world government. A world government of supranational sovereignty of the intellectual elite and world bankers. He says it's surely preferable to what we have. He's one of the tops of up there in that 0.001% who believe that their money comes from God. It comes from God. Well, what do they know? They inherited the system, right? They don't know how it works. But they've been planning this world government for a long time, because go back to 24 and even further back, these conventions of the bankers talking about this stuff. Principal men now engaged in forming an imperialism to govern the world, and by dividing the voter through the political party system, we can get them to waste their time on unsubstantive issues. We have plenty of that going on. Nations are enslaved by debt, right? And so any government that doesn't issue the nation's money is controlled by those who do. This guy found out. He came before the Troika, right, and introduced himself, and the president pushed his nameplate forward and leaned forward and said, elections cannot be allowed to change the economic policies of any country. Well, now we have a surprise here. If people are electing people based on economic issues, we got a problem. Need to change the system so we can do that. We need to have a democratic government. So here's that web of debt people talk about. The top 20 banks. This is a little out of date because you say Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns are still on it. But, I imagine things shift around. But, there's 20-some banks around the world that control. What do they control? Let's see. Maybe 196 governments, 2,300 corporations or so, trying to control 7 billion people. They got their hands full, but they're pretty clever. Who's boss? I wanted to bring this to you, because if you haven't seen this, because these are people who used to work for Goldman Sachs, and then they worked for the government, and some of them went back to Goldman Sachs, and some of them came back to the government, so you have this revolving door, they call it, right? Well, that's just Goldman Sachs. Here's the media, pharmaceuticals, big oil, Monsanto, Disney, another media corporation, GE, Comcast, another media corporation. Good heavens. And it goes on. Well, here's a Venn diagram. I want to say I agree with Mark Pash, by the way, on how we want to get the left and right together and get them on the same page. Whereas one side corporations have too much power, and the other side says the government has too much power. I want to say the bankers control both the governments and the corporations, so isn't that where we should be putting our focus? And a public money system could provide a more caring society for the liberals, and fewer taxes and less government for the conservatives. Everybody should be happy. So we got to end the oligarchy, because their wars are not our wars. Their wars, their government is not our government. We need to make it our government so that we can change policy. Economic policy. But it's kind of hard to sell, because as Ed pointed out, it's hard to speak the truth to a society that believes lies. And so we're working on those money myths. But there's an issue. I think Abbott and Costello would have fun with this, because our money is created and issued by the government, and banks lend existing money in time deposits. No, that's a myth. But that's how it's supposed to be. You say it's supposed to be, but it's a myth? What are you talking? I think they'd have a good time with that on a comedy routine. Because that's the way it should be, but it's a myth. And there's all kinds of memes and facts and beliefs out there, all of these things you're familiar with. You know, it takes money to make money. The most powerful one being money is the root of all evil. And a lot of people believe that and don't think about the money, especially the money system. So we're trying to get him to talk about the money system. So here's a slide I stole from John. How? He recognized it. I just changed the background color and added these big green arrows. Now you know what these big green arrows are? That's the commons. That's the environment. That's all our resources. So we have this exchange of goods and services, and it all comes from outside. And what do we give back? Waste, pollution, stuff messing up natural systems. So we need to change that, because besides this circulating, we need some circulating going on in here and here and here, you know, returning good to the environment. And there's a science developed now. I kind of came out of permaculture into the greens. I had been working with a bunch of people doing all kinds of interesting things, and we were running classes at the Echo Village Training Center, training people about permaculture and natural building and all kinds of different things. And this is a system that's closing the loops. That's what it's about. It's scaling down the technology to community sizes, villages, towns, cities, where we can close the loops, because we can get the nutrients and everything back right from that system and return them. So this is a setup where it's showing how one system's waste feeds the next system, so that there's never any waste, because it's closed, a closed loop. And out of this, we can get food, organic food, and we can get clean water, we can get fuel, and we can get our energy out of a system like this. But I mentioned something about psychological effects and how the economics of greed would, changing to economics of care, would make a big difference in people's minds and how society works. And not an immediate change, but over time. This would have an effect, I believe, because I believe the values of a monetary system is based on, become the dominant values of the society over time. And there's some research being done on that. Psychological consequences of money back in 2006, where the mere presence of money made people a barrier to social intimacy. And they did another experiment where they put 2 rooms of people taking an exam. And in one room there was a big picture of a dollar bill, and in the other room there was a picture of a seashell. And in the room where the dollar was, people sat further apart. Others for help, responded to requests for help insensitively, and preferred working alone rather than in collaboration. When they looked into the window of the other room that had the seashell, they discovered people were sitting close to one another. They didn't hesitate to ask for help. They were sensitive to others, how others felt, and they were laughing and joking and collaborating on the test. They were asking each other, how are you answering this test? You know, that kind of stuff. So a big difference. But I want to point out, you know, seashells have been used for money too. So it's really 2 different kinds of money that was showing there. And of course, there was 4 studies done on organizational behavior relating to money, and they said exposure to money can trigger unethical and intentions and behavior. 7 more studies on money on behavior, and it affects the wealthy too. Wealthy children are distressed more often because of, you know, high risk for anxiety, depression, substance abuse, all of these things in very wealthy children. You see the ones that are successful, but I have a feeling there's a bunch of them we don't see. And it's all because we're not really talking about money at all. We're talking about usury. Money that's based on usury. And as Dante said, it's the anti-art. And I love this one, an extraordinarily efficient form of violence by which you do the most damage with the least effort. And I think that it kind of is doing that out there, right? And usury is a progenitor of the 7 deadly sins. That's why it was a sin in every religion, right? Because wrath, greed, sloth, pride, lust. We got a presidential candidate that kind of represents a lot of those right now, I think. So again, the values of a monetary system, whatever it's based on, become the dominant values. And I think that's one of the exciting things. That's one of the very exciting thing for me about monetary reform, because it's not just going to change the economic system and make it more fair and make it more robust. It's going to make people much nicer to one another. And I believe in love. I don't hate anybody. I'm disappointed in some of the things they do, but love is the way forward. And talking about money, though, with people is kind of like, asking a fish, how's the water? And what? What do you mean? Isn't money just money? Well, in talking to the Greens, I run up against a few things. And that's kind of what I'm talking about here, is that one is they say, well, it's not an issue for most people, so we don't want to get behind it because it's not an issue for people. We're a political party, we want to get elected, so we want to get behind the issues, Well, that puts them behind the symptoms, right? And, but I said, how many people heard of fracking before it was made an issue by the activists? Nobody. Well, you did. Not very many people knew about fracking until it was made an issue. Some say, well, it's too complex to understand. I says, what's complex about government making money for our needs? There's nothing complicated about that at all. In fact, it's a lot simpler than what we got. Well, but we want to eliminate money. What? You want to eliminate money? How are you going to do that? Really? Well, there's this thing going around, books being written about the gift economy, right? We're going to be gifting everything. I said, well, the public money system can fix you up with that because we'd like to gift a national dividend to everybody. And, but that's not good enough. Because exchange is bad. Exchange is the evil. It created capitalism and patriarchy, they say. So what? How could that possibly be? Exchange is important because if you didn't have an exchange every few seconds, you'd be dead in minutes. And all of nature works that way. All of nature is engaged in exchange constantly. Well, that's what an economy is too. Exchange. So it's real important. And another one they said was, well, scarcity is required for an exchange system to function. No, it's not. Markets can have to be competitive. There can't be an uncompetitive market. I said, well, they were uncompetitive for thousands of years, I think, before this money system came into being. Well, but private property is a problem. It says, well, you got something there depending on what you mean by property. But I said a private money system is a big problem, and and they still having a hard time hearing that because they want to eschew money. But I'm making some progress and getting through to people. This week especially, or this past week, I put out a thing where I said, couldn't Jill Stein preface her economic remarks with the sentence I shared with you a while ago? And one person came back and says, we don't want to make that an issue right now. And 5 people jumped on her about it. And I thought, okay, I'm making some progress. I didn't have to do it. But the problem partly is what Marshall McLuhan was talking about when he said the small secrets are the only ones that need to be protected because the big secrets are kept secret by public incredulity. And there's a lot of, that's what I run into all the time, is the incredulity about money. And where does this incredulity come from? Well, here's one. I don't want to offend anybody, but I say we've got a social management system. The mass schooling system came into being 2 years after the Fed. It was pushed by the same people because they wanted a schooling system that provided them obedient workers, compliant consumers, good soldiers, and they wanted a school system that took them away from their parents so that the values of the industrial economy could be inculcated into the children. And so that is a big problem for us, right, in trying to tell people about something that they've believed otherwise all their lives. And of course they got that idea from media, because back a ways, let's talk about this. The mass media, around the turn of the century, they were out, bribing professors to support the central bank plan that the bankers had going. And they were using propaganda techniques from a guy named Bernays. Edward Bernays. Edward Bernays was the cousin of Sigmund Freud. And he wasn't into helping people. He was into engineering mass psychological engineering to control both sides of the debate. They learned early on you got to control both sides of the debate to make it work. And so they figure, okay, we get the schooling system, we'll start inculcating to the children on this system. Now, the architect of the secondary school system was Alexander Ingalls. The Harvard chairman education is named after him. He he set up these 6 functions of mass schooling. This is what we're doing. We have the adaptive function, which is for obedience, the integrating function for conformity, the differentiating for sorting classes. Yes, directive. Why do they call them classrooms? Directive, specific role that you're trained for. Selective, tagging the unfit. That's one we're seeing more and more today. And then the propedeutic function, which is training the managers of the system in the future. The school system is the largest consumer of psychological services in the country. Universities, as I was talking about, they had some professors getting bribed to support the central bank idea, and the economics departments came after that, also promoted by the bankers and funded by the bankers to create economics departments. And then they started teaching Marx, of course, because here's a non-threatening to capitalism philosophy that they could teach people, and since it was harmless, it won't cause them any trouble. I get a lot of flack from Marxists. What do you mean we're going to take over the world? I don't think so. Because you don't really understand money or economics or exchange, so I'm not sure it's going to be much of a change. Because I always argue, well, for one thing, Marx did recognize, that money plays the largest part in determining the course of history, but the system of private bank debt money is capitalism's essential feature, and yet it's not taught. That is not taught about what capitalism is, and not the study of it, not the definition of it. And so I'm out, part of my campaign is to change the definition of capitalism that people have, because so many people believe that it's the private ownership of the means of production. Oh, really? You mean this guy down here with a truckload of tools that hires a helper is a capitalist? Some of them believe they're a capitalist and practicing capitalism. I always say, well, if you're a capitalist, can you create capital? Well, no. Well, then you're not a capitalist. I say, what is a capitalist who can't create money? He's an ex-capitalist. He's not doing it. And democracy, you say majority rule, power to the people, that's what democracy is. Well, yeah, sort of. It definitely is, but we don't need, but that's not real clear. I say capitalism is the private control of money, and democracy is the public control of money. And there's your two economic systems that are opposing one another. Socialism is not an economic system. There's a lot of people think it's an economic system, and they try to make it an economic system, but it doesn't work. It can't work. Because they don't understand exchange and how an economy works. So it's not, how can an economic system work that you don't even understand the exchange system? So there's your two opposing economic systems, from my view. And so why aren't the economists telling us about money and how the system works and all of that kind of stuff? Well, that's obvious, right? Money is power, and so that's the third rail for an economist's career. It'll threaten tenure and stuff like that. Now, I know there's some economists in there, in here, who might be able to verify that. I'm not sure. And of course, as I said, I'm a generalist. So, there's always exceptions to the rule. So that's, some economists might be able to get away with talking about money. I'm not sure where they are. They're not at the University of Kansas. So let's make some change concrete. And the ingredients are a critical mass of people dissatisfied with the current economic system. Well, we kind of have that, right? Seems like. And then large-scale support for a new economic narrative capable of replacing the old one. Well, we've got the new economic narrative. What we're missing is large-scale support. So that's the missing element in our change concrete. But change is happening, We got Iceland and Switzerland and England and the Netherlands all clamoring for the same thing, which is these three essential reforms, basically. The Chicago Plan, the NEED Act, Green Party's platform. That's what the essential reforms are that we need. And it's happening in a lot of other countries as well. And that's a positive development. So I keep telling my Greens, I found this polling data. A couple of guys that pull a lot of polling data together, and they've got a website too where people can go and register their position on things. And what I discovered in looking at all that polling data, almost 80% of Americans want the Fed investigated. Now, there's not been any media on that issue, and yet how did so many Americans want that? I think that's kind of amazing. And, of course, silence is golden, right? So media's not talking about it because they belong to somebody else. They don't belong to us. So I keep talking about the Greens on how here's all the symptoms or the branches, right? And it takes a lot of people. A lot of people are involved, a lot of nonprofits, a lot of money, a lot of effort, a lot of time involved in this. But very few out here working on that monetary reform lever, which could move the world. But with that little of political action, it's not going to do it. And so what we need to do, I keep telling them, well, let's set those issues down for a little bit. And let's focus on this one, and we can move the world. And then we can fix all of those issues with this one, as I keep telling them. And because the TPP coming down the line, that is one of those elements of that David Rockefeller plan of implementing a world government. And the TPP and the TTIP and TISA are rules that mostly don't have anything to do with trade. They have everything to do with sovereignty and taking our sovereignty away and making it possible so they can sue governments for anything that they do, and even sue them for losses that they imagine that they have. And so it's TINA, right? There is no alternative to some political action on that. And we need, because we really need to stop it. And the only way we're going to do that, of course, is elect our own government. And we need to get reconnected with nature. And that is, a public money system will help us do that. Because without nature, we're in big trouble. And it's going down as we speak. And so I say, blessed are the workarounds. Because I agree with Mark Pash on just about everything, except I don't think the Clintons are going to agree with you anytime soon. All right. All right, thank you. That's all my talk.